Hello everybody and welcome back to the Oswego Blizzards Dynasty. As you can see, we are on a bye week this week, so we are going to quickly look over the recruiting for this week, and then we're really going to dive in and see how the relegation and promotion battles for each tier are going to look like this week, as we are really shaping up with only 2 weeks left to play. So with Oswego, we did pick up Daniel Schaefer, a strong safety, and we also picked up Brad Soule, defensive tackle, just bored people. So we're really looking to try and get better players that we have on our board now. So Matt Francis is one of those guys, so we're going to double the amount of points we're going to put on him, making him cost 1.6 budget points all around. And also Jamie Brown is also somebody that we really want to just get. We want to get Jamie Brown, so we're going to increase on him, and hopefully we can pick him up soon. So this is kind of what he's looking like. He's got the speed, he's got some pass rush and block shed to try and help us out that way. So that's somebody that we could really use and could be a big time help for the team coming up next year. So that's going to put us at 6.76 budget points for this week. That is going to push us just slightly over budget for this week, but we're still sitting pretty good with our budget points as we are wrapping up the season. So next, we're going to advance the week so that we can see the results of the games that happened this week, and then we're really going to dive into the conference standings right here and right now. So just like last week, we're going to look at Tier 4 in the Independents first, and then we're going to go into Tier 1 and Tier 2 for the West and Central, and the Tier 3 as well, and then move on to the Southeast and the Northeast. But starting with the Independents, because it really sets up everything going forward, as they are going to be the ones that will be promoting and causing people to be relegated in Tier 3. So, looking at the Independents, South Alabama, they won last week, so now they can seal their promotion by beating Nebraska Kearney this week. But Navy still has a chance at promotion, but need to have South Alabama lose this week, and they'll need to beat Army in week 15. So it's still up in the air, but South Alabama could seal it. And New Mexico now has no chance of promotion as they lost to USC and will not be able to catch South Alabama or Navy in the Tier 4 Independence running. So now, going to Tier 1 in the West, we're going to look at the Pac-12. So looking at the relegation battle that we've got going on right now between Arizona and Stanford. So Arizona lost to Oregon this week, and now they're going to go up against Arizona State next week. So they have to win this game against Arizona State to avoid relegation, as they've already lost to Stanford earlier in the season, as we said last week. Now Stanford, that Arizona loss really keeps them alive for one more week, and they just really need Arizona to lose one last game. If Arizona were to win, Stanford is going to be the team that is relegated. Now, the championship game is really interesting in the West. So we've got Oregon versus Oregon State this week. Oregon is going to be playing for the championship game next week. If they were to lose, if Oregon were to lose to Oregon State, their rival, and Second Haven were to beat Kansas State, there would be a three-way tie for that championship spot. If Second Haven loses, Oregon State would then be the team that takes that championship spot. So that makes things very interesting in that division. Now looking at the other division, the game of the week for them is USC versus UCLA. This rivalry game will determine who is going to be in that championship game next week. So the winner is going to take that championship spot. So now looking at the Centrals, Tier 1 in the Big 12, relegation, Nebraska, they lost to Oklahoma this week, so they're going to be relegated into Tier 2, one of the first teams to bite the dust. And then in the championship game, Texas and Oklahoma, they've already clinched their champ spots last week. So the Big 12 is pretty boring for the next 2 weeks. So now we're going to look at Tier 2 from the West Division in the Mountain West. So promotion has now become very interesting with the losses from Farmington and San Jose State this week. So now we are looking at California, Farmington, San Jose State, and Washington State that all have a legitimate shot at being promoted this season. So Cal, they're a really surprising team fighting for promotion because of those Farmington and San Jose State losses. They don't have a game this week. They don't have a game next week, but in week 15, they're going to play Kansas. So California right now, they're sitting really nice. They're 2-1 against the other contenders, and with their only loss being to Farmington. So now looking at Farmington, their loss to Washington State this week really sets them back and puts them a half game back for promotion against Cal. They now have to play against San Diego State next week and probably can't afford to lose a third game if they want to be promoted. They still control their own destiny, being a game up on Washington State, who's the only other team to have beaten them amongst the contending teams right now. So now looking at San Jose State, their loss to Air Force was incredibly shocking and may end their chances of being promoted. They will play Fresno State next week and then Farmington the week after that. So they're going to really need to win out, and also will need California to lose to Kansas in week 15 if they're going to be promoted, since they've already lost to Cal already. And then Washington State, with their win over Farmington this week, they launched themselves into promotion contention, being only one game back and only have one more conference game to play, which is going to be against the University of Alaska. So now looking at relegation in the Mountain West, it is between Air Force and Billings. This week for Air Force could seal them from being relegated this year. They're 2 games up on the bottom team Billings, and they're going to play them this upcoming week. If Air Force were to win, they are safe automatically. And Billings, they're probably dead in the water right now. They need to beat Air Force this next week, and they need to beat San Diego State in week 15. They haven't won a game yet, so the chances of them winning both games now are pretty low. On top of that, they need Air Force to lose to Fresno State in week 15 as well. Those overtime losses that they had at home might really haunt them in their dreams. So now looking at the Central's Division Tier 2 with the Big Ten. And promotion is crazy, as well as relegation. There's so many options available right now for the Big Ten. So promotion has UTEP, Wisconsin, UTSA, Tulsa, Joplin, and Minnesota all vying for that promotion spot. So UTEP right now, they lost again this week, which opens up the promotion spot to the other 5 teams of the possible 10 that the Big Ten has available, with only 2 weeks to go. They will be going up against another contender next week in Joplin, and could really make week 15 very interesting if they were to lose, which would bring them with everyone else on 3 losses. If they win, they will be a game up on everyone, with only losses to Minnesota Tech and Tulane, and no losses to other contenders for the time being. They still have to face Joplin and Iowa, so only having to play one more contending team. A win against Joplin this week could just guarantee them moving up to the Big 12. So now looking at Wisconsin, they lost to Minnesota this week, which keeps Minnesota in the mix of teams that could reach the promotion spot. They are going to be going up against Tulsa, another team looking at promotion next week. So losses this next week can go a long way, especially if UTEP wins their game next week. So now looking at UTSA, so they kept themselves up in the conversation for promotion by beating Minnesota Tech this week. They also have another great opportunity next week to try and stay up competing against a team in the relegation zone in Texas Tech. So now looking at Tulsa. Tulsa got a big win against Joplin this week, keeping them in the conversation. They now take on Wisconsin next week in the heated battle for promotion. Now looking at Joplin. So they took the L against Tulsa this week, which drops Joplin from the top spot in the Big Ten. And now they have to try and make up for it against UTEP next week. They have to beat them to continue to try and compete for promotion. A loss puts them too far back from UTEP at that point. And last team for fighting for promotion is Minnesota. They grabbed a massive win against a top team in Wisconsin this week, keeping them in the conversation for promotion. They now get an easier game, quote unquote, easier game, next week against Tulane as they continue to try and earn promotion. And if you thought that the promotion was busy, relegation is also very busy in the Big Ten. The teams that are in the relegation zone right now are Texas Tech, Minnesota Tech, Iowa, and Tulane, which rounds out the rest of the Big Ten. Every team in the Big Ten is fighting for something at this point, either to move up to the Big 12 or fighting to stay in Tier 2. So we're going to talk about Texas Tech first. They're a half game back from the other teams that are in the relegation zone. They had a bye this week and will play UTSA next week, who is fighting for promotion. Although they do have wins over Iowa and Tulane and are yet to play Minnesota Tech in Week 15. They do have control over their own destiny, but a win against UTSA could really go a long way in keeping them in Tier 2. So now looking at Minnesota Tech, they lost to UTSA this week, which puts them in a very dangerous position. They now have 5 losses along with the other relegation zone teams. They don't play a conference game next week, but their Week 15 matchup is against current bottom team Texas Tech. They have lost to all the teams that are in the bottom, so that Week 15 matchup is going to be massive for them. If they lose that one, they're going to be the team that will be up for relegation if the Conference USA champion is from the Central Division. So now looking at Iowa, they did not have a conference game this week. Their last conference game is up against promotion favorite UTEP. They are at the same level as all the other 5-loss teams in the relegation zone, but does have a win over Minnesota Tech and Tulane, which helps them greatly. If they were to lose in Week 15, which is likely, they will need Minnesota Tech to be the team that loses the relegation battle between Texas Tech. So now looking at Tulane, the last team from the Big Ten we'll talk about after we talked about every team. They're a half game ahead of the other teams in the relegation zone and will be going up against Minnesota next week. Obviously, only having 4 losses going into Week 15 would be massive for them staying out of the relegation zone. So now we're going to go and talk about Tier 3. Just as a reminder, as I will say every time for these Tier 3 games, the promotion team that goes up to Tier 2 is the winner between the conference championship game. If the conference champion comes from the West, they will move up to the Mountain West, and there's no team relegated out of the Big Ten. But if the winner out of the Central wins the conference championship game, they will move up to the Big Ten, and nobody from the Mountain West will be relegated. So we're going to look at the West Division first. This is the track of the Mountain West and the Pac-12. There are 2 teams right now fighting for the promotion, UNLV and Boise State. So UNLV got their win against Northern Illinois this week to stay at 1 loss in conference. Unfortunately for them, Boise State also beat Rapid City this week, so they did not seal the champ spot. They now are going to face Boise State for the champ spot next week. And now talking about Boise, they got their win against Rapid City to keep them as a challenger for the champ spot in the West. They now, as we've stated, they will now fight for that spot next week. The winner will earn the chance to play for the right to move up into Tier 2. And then I want to talk about Colorado real quick because they are the bottom team, and as they lost the relegation battle spot against Utah State, Colorado isn't going to be relegated this year with that New Mexico loss to USC this week. Wanted to make sure that was stated because New Mexico was vying for that promotion spot, but the New Mexico loss puts them out of the running for promotion, which means Colorado is not going to be relegated from Tier 3. And then talking about the Central Division, Louisiana got their win to guarantee the champ spot from the Central Division in the Tier 3 level. They had to take it to overtime, but now will await the winner of the Boise State and UNLV game next week. Now moving on to the east side of the nation, we're going to look at the Southeast first in Tier 1 with the SEC. So looking at the relegation battle, Auburn beat UCF in their game this week. So as was stated last week, this keeps them up in Tier 1 for now. This also means that NC State will now be sent to the American Conference in Tier 2 after they've already lost to both UCF and Auburn already. And for the championship game, as was stated last week, the teams that have already guaranteed their champ spots are North Carolina and Alabama. So now looking at the Northeast Tier 1 with the ACC. With the relegation battle going on, Northwestern was on the chopping block last week, and they sealed that they will be relegated to the MAC by losing to Michigan State this week, having already lost to Cincinnati. And now for the championship game, Ohio State pulled off a squeaker against West Virginia to give them their champ spot in their division to face their rival, Michigan, who has already locked up their champ spot. On top of beating West Virginia, Ohio State will be playing for the right to play in the national championship game, as they are the second-ranked team in the country at the moment. So now looking at the Southeast Tier 2 conference, the American Conference, we are looking at the promotion, which has a couple teams fighting for that promotion. Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, Mississippi State, Duke, and Wake Forest all have a shot at being promoted. So talking about Georgia Tech first, they were able to beat Memphis this week very handedly and keeps them in the driver's seat for promotion. Their last conference game is in week 15 against Duke. With a win there, they will earn promotion to the SEC, as they have already beaten Virginia Tech earlier this season, with Virginia Tech being the only other team that's lost 2 games. Now looking at Virginia Tech, they beat ECU this week to keep them at 2 losses in conference and still in the promotion zone, with Georgia Tech as the headliners in that zone. So Virginia Tech gets bottom team and rival Virginia next week to try and stay tied for that promotion spot. Their week 15 matchup is against Wake Forest, another contending team that they will have to win to stay in it. Now looking at Mississippi State, they have already finished all of their conference games and now are waiting to see if Georgia Tech or Virginia Tech will lose a game. They have a win over Virginia Tech, but they have lost to Georgia Tech. So they will need a lot of help to earn that promotion spot. Now looking at Duke, Duke lost to Wake Forest this week, which puts them a game back from the promotion zone for right now. They still have their matchup against top dogs Georgia Tech in week 15 to keep them alive. They do have a loss to Virginia Tech, so they will need them to lose out for their best shot at moving up to Tier 1. And last team in the promotion fight is Wake Forest. They beat Duke this week, which now puts them into contention for the promotion spot. They still have 2 games to go and will face a bottom team in Memphis next week to try and stay up. They have wins over Duke and Georgia Tech already and still have to face Virginia Tech in week 15. So right now they're still a dark horse candidate for promotion. Now looking at the relegation battle, we have Virginia and Memphis right now. So looking at Virginia, they lost a close one to South Carolina this week, which keeps them in the bottom spot for relegation with only one win. They will face a top team in Virginia Tech next week. They do have a win over the other relegation zone team, Memphis, which makes their Week 15 matchup against Kentucky very important. They need to get at least a win in the next 2 weeks. And now looking at Memphis, they lost to Georgia Tech this week, which still keeps them near the bottom at the relegation zone. They'll take on Wake Forest next week to try and continue to stay up because they do already still have that loss to Virginia already in the season. So now looking at the other Tier 2 conference, the MAC from the Northeast. For promotion, Purdue was able to get their win against Illinois this week, which will guarantee them the promotion to the ACC in Tier 1. They are one game up on Central Michigan and have already beat them, giving them the tiebreaker over them. So now looking at the relegation fight in the MAC, we have Marshall and Eastern Michigan. So Marshall got their first win on the season by beating other relegation zone team Eastern Michigan. They are now tied for the bottom spot, with Eastern Michigan taking the relegation spot for now. Marshall's going to be taking on Rutgers next week, and they control their own destiny after beating Eastern Michigan this week. And now Eastern Michigan, with their loss to Marshall, it's a really tough loss for them and now puts them at the bottom of the conference and in the most danger of being relegated to Tier 3, for the opportunity of being relegated to Tier 3. They now will take on the second place team, Central Michigan, next week, and will be hoping that Marshall loses a game, or else they're going to be the ones that have the shot of being relegated. So now looking at the Tier 3 in the Sun Belt Conference, and we're going to start in the Southeast Division. For the championship game, UAB and Western Kentucky are the teams that are fighting for that champ spot. UAB was able to pull off their close win against Georgia State, and now they're going to face Western Kentucky this next week for the opportunity to be promoted by playing against the Northeast champ. And Western Kentucky were able to easily handle that top spot challenger Old Dominion next week to set up this matchup against UAB to clinch the champ spot for the Southeast Division. And looking at the relegation game, we've got Troy and Old Dominion. Troy was able to win their game this week against USF to keep them having a fighting chance of avoiding being relegated to Tier 4 and move into the independents. They will now be facing Old Dominion for the battle to avoid relegation next week. And Old Dominion lost to Western Kentucky, which now puts them this week, which now puts them square in the relegation zone going into the last week of conference play. They will be facing Troy this next week for the right to stay in the Sun Belt and Tier 3, as the Tier 4 champion appears to be coming from the Southeast Division, which is going to force one of them to move down. So this is a very important game for both Troy and Old Dominion coming up next week. So now looking at the last division in the Sun Belt, the Northeast Division, promotion, as was stated last week, Toledo had already guaranteed their champ spot and will await the winner of the UAB Western Kentucky game for the right to move up into Tier 2. And in the relegation fight, Akron, again, just like last week, Akron's going to be the team that could be relegated to the independents and Tier 4 if and only if this scenario happens. South Alabama needs to lose their last game this next week, and Navy needs to beat Army in Week 15. If any of these scenarios do not happen, Akron will survive this year, even with their very poor showing in conference play. So that will do it for the update. This coming last week and second to last weeks of the season hopefully that gave you a good taste of what is going to happen for this upcoming season and the promotion and relegation that is going to be happening. I'm very excited about how this season is going to end, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the relegation battles end up, as well as the promotion battles that are going on right now in the season. But to finish up, we'll look at this matchup that we're going to be facing off against Notre Dame as our last game of the season and our last money game of the season. They are pretty much the reason why we, as well as the other really good, powerful teams, the reason why we're able to even recruit to the level that we are able to recruit. We kind of took this season off and basically wrote it off as, yeah, we're probably going to lose every game, but we are going to be facing up against some really good teams so that we can get the players that we need to go into this next season. So stay tuned next week. I'll give a even more in-depth look of promotion and relegation in its own video. So look out for next week's videos.